Let's do this.
Stan Lee.
Oh
Stan the
my
man.
gosh, Stan the man, what is going on?
That is a very good question.
I'm so worried about Stan. I'm just gonna be straight with you.
I am too.
I'm worried. I'm worried about Stan.
I've been watching a lot of documentaries about his career and his life lately. It's interesting. It's kind of sad seeing somebody on the
way
the downswing, I guess you could say.
He's 95 years
He's
old,
95.
man. He's 95 years old.
I'll drink to that, man.
Drink
That's
to that.
impressive.
Oh man, it tastes cheap. I like it. So we are talking about Stan Lee today,
Yep.
and we're gonna. Okay, when you walked into the house, let's start there. Mm-hmm. Let the audience know what you walked into when we wanted to start this podcast. When we wanted to start scripting this very heavy podcast.
I walked into a scene straight out of one of my favorite TV shows. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You're standing there with a crazy, crazy whiteboard full of all kinds of ramblings and rantings and conspiracies, and we just got done going over all of the stuff that was on that whiteboard, breaking down several of the news articles that have been released in the past couple days.
Guys, I went deep.
So deep.
Like I went too deep.
Yeah.
I know way too much about the last 6 months of Stan Lee's life than I would like to. And we're not even good at what we decided was that depending on the response from this video, we're going to not touch on everything.
Yeah.
Because there's only so much of it that needs to be touched on. Because when we get to the end of this conversation, we're gonna have our opinions on the matter, on our views on this situation. Because what we have here is a really interesting. It's hard to even describe what's happening because the community is kind of divided right now. I think is the best way to put this. Stan Lee is 95 years old.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he is.
And he's still doing conventions, and he did a convention this past weekend. And I feel like I'm talking about the CGC again, but it was a shit show.
Yeah.
It was a shit show. And it's not the kind of shit show where you're like, oh, the business is just like, I had to wait really long, because there was a couple of complaints. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say the complaints can be summed up like this. The first one is that this company wasn't prepared. They oversold how many signings there were going to be done. Okay. And this is, which convention is this? I apologize. I should mention which conventions.
Silicon Valley.
Thank you,
Comic
Ryan.
Convention. Yes, sir.
Silicon Valley Comic Convention.
Where I'm here.
And the first problem was that it was oversold. A lot of people were waiting in line, and they were waiting a long time to get something signed by Stan the Man. That's the first complaint. The second complaint is that there was like straight up problems happening handling these books. Comic books were ruined at this show, getting signed in the process. And I have proof of it. We actually are going to talk about that in a minute here. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is that essentially the fans felt that although it was really cool getting to meet Stan and having him sign something that most of these people probably ended up selling at the end of the day or posting online or will sell eventually, it kind of described him as a damn puppet. Like, I don't, it sounds terrible to say that, but there's pictures circulating that this guy's just like, he just doesn't look happy.
That's the impression I got as an outsider. I've never been to a con. I have an outsider's perspective on the whole thing, I guess you could say. And it did not seem to me that he was entirely into it. Like, he seemed a little tired, and then during the picture-taking portion, he did not seem to be very enthusiastic. Normally, you can't contain that man's enthusiasm, but he seemed a little down.
People were sad about it.
Yeah.
And they voiced their concerns online, and it made it into the most, there's a lot to be said, and we're going to dive into it right now. No better time to do it. I'm your host, Comic Tom.
And I'm Ryan.
And this is Bags and Boards, and I almost forgot the name of the podcast. Let's talk art. Important. Let's just talk art right now.
Yes.
Where to begin?
Saturday.
Let's just begin with Saturday.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to give a shout out to my homie, Comic Books 22, all right? Comic Books 22 is a member of the IG Comic Fam, a great page. I recommend him. And, he posted a couple alarming pictures from his recent visit to Silicon Valley Comic-Con. And, wow, I'm speechless. I'm speechless by his experience, because I know you saw these pictures. Mm-hmm. What was your first thoughts, Ryan?
My first thought was that something was wrong. That's initially what I felt like. And I saw this on my own, the day of, actually, I think it was 2 days ago. And my first thought was like, this is weird. This is abnormal. He's not normally like this.
Right.
And I have a very surface level understanding of Stan Lee's appearances at conventions. I've never been.
There were two things. The first is a video clip that Comic Books 22 posted. And the video clip is of Stan Lee's partner, his friend, Kia Morgan, manhandling the remains of a cap number 3, I believe is what he said it was. Essentially, what we have here is, collectors who go into signings prepared, okay? When you have a comic book that you want to get signed by an artist, there's a couple things that are important. Aside from, making sure that it gets witnessed if you want it to get graded, having the right book in front of the artist, you want to make sure that the artist had something to do with the book.
Exactly.
You don't want to get that, that Batman comic signed by Stan Lee, right? Which we've all seen before on Instagram, I'm sure. But also what you want to do is you want to prepare what you can so you can see, ideally, to get that signature placed on a part of the comic that you want it to be placed. And the best way to do that is by not leaving it up to chance and kind of forcing the artist or writer, or whoever you're having sign it in the spot that you want. Do you know how they do that, Ryan?
Like a stencil, right? You put like a cover over most of the comic with a little box.
Exactly.
I think I saw a picture.
Yeah, what most people do is they will take an X-Acto knife, they'll cut the top part of the comic, the square that they want. They may even put tape around the edges so that it's really clear for that person to see, like, oh, it's within the blue or
This
wherever
is your
it is.
window to sign.
Exactly.
Okay.
So he did this. He did this to over 10 comic books, okay? Makes sense. I mean, you wanted to get this done right. This may be the last time you have a chance of getting something signed by Stan Lee, right?
Yeah.
And I also know that Comic Books 22, he mentioned that, side note, I reached out to him after this and said, hey, I would love to use your footage. I would love to tell your story. Is that okay? And he did give me permission to chat about this. I don't think Bleedingcool did that. I think they just used the information and posted because they posted it really, really quick after he posted his video, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Regardless, what we have here is someone who went to go get these comic books signed. And then Morgan, we're going to call him Morgan, the partner of Stan Lee. It's Kia Morgan. This is an important name to remember.
Remember that name.
But Kia Morgan, he is the person now who is his right-hand man, okay? This is new, by the way. And yeah, Kia Morgan says immediately, oh, shoot, there's not enough room on this comic. We need to open the window up. And starts to rip it off. And in this video, you see Kia literally putting his hand in the hole and tearing that plastic a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if his hand grazed the comic book, which is insane to me that it's insane that this happened.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Stan Lee's right-hand guy, okay? So anyways, this happened. And what ended up what this person had to do, Comic Books 22, what he ended up having to do is he had to pull a bunch of his comic books back and say, all right, I'm going to start taking these out and getting them ready for Stan. If you're not going to, I'll open the windows if I have to. Oh my gosh.
Let me do this myself.
Let me do that. Yeah. But it gets worse because one of the nurses, he said that it was a nurse, not Kia, that did this. But he said one of the nurses started getting involved with taking the comics out of the bag. What he said happened was the nurse pulled an ASM 14, the first appearance of Green Goblin, out.
Oh, no.
And yeah, he lifted a piece of the cover, it tore the cover a little bit.
Right off.
Yeah, and there's pictures of it online, and it hurts my heart to know that this happened. And yeah, it happened because someone who was handling the comic books shouldn't have been handling the damn comic books, but they did, and they screwed up the comic. Now, there's so much wrong with this story, and we're this is the problem when we started doing this podcast. Yes. Ryan, what was the one thing you kept saying? You're
there's a lot here. We need to be careful not to get lost.
I'm already getting lost. I'm already getting lost, but we have to. We have to go through this part. The nurse says, "Oh shoot," or this happens, right? And then Kia says, "Oh no. You need to be careful with these. These are first editions."
Yeah.
That's the quote from Comic Books 22, that this person said that he called the comic books first editions. What's the first thing that pops into your head when someone calls a first print comic book, a first edition.
That they might not necessarily know what they're talking about.
And that's my thought.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that that's what everyone else is thinking. So let's move forward. The result of that, by the way, because it was one of Stan Lee's nurses who damaged this comic book, Stan Lee purchased that comic book from Comic Books 22.
Like reimbursed him.
Reimbursed him for the comic and signed it for free. Okay?
Pretty nice of him.
It is nice of him. But if you ever wondered what happened when someone makes a mistake like that, now you know.
That's what happens.
Yeah, and Comic Books 22 also mentioned that it took him hours to figure this out. So, who to go to, he was getting shuffled around. All I can say is it sounds like a terrible con experience. It sounds like a terrible Stan Lee experience. And aside from all of that, the follow-up message that he posted wasn't about complaining about the con. It was complaining that Stan Lee didn't look healthy. He didn't look happy. And it's kind of sad.
That's pretty damn sad, I would say.
Right? How would you feel if something like that happened to you at a convention that you probably went to see Stan Lee?
Yeah, I've got a whole different perspective on that now that I've dug into this a little bit. Like, I don't know. I would have gone and been excited to get something signed by the man, but upon seeing him, I don't know. I'd feel a little strange.
Right?
But that's just me.
You see a couple of these videos and he looks...
I would feel a little guilty by
Right?
the time I got up there and saw him signing it, and I don't know. The whole thing was a little off.
That's how I felt about it, and I'm watching the video.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine if you're standing there waiting in line for hours and you just want to get it done, and then you're like, shoot, I'm waiting in line to get this signed by someone who looks like they don't want to do it. And that's where this kind of gets into, is the questioning, the concerns of fans, because that's actually Bleedingcool's focus on this article wasn't so much of, hey, they screwed up a comic book. On the contrary, no, that's not what they were talking about. What they were talking about was that the fans are getting concerned about Stan Lee's appearance, about him even showing up and doing these types of things anymore. Yeah. Is he being taken advantage of? Is this elder abuse?
Yep, that's being thrown around a lot lately.
Mm-hmm.
Questions of that. But you've got to consider too, right? Like, what was that other thing he said that Comic Books 22 about Kia Morgan not being there before?
Ooh.
That he's seen.
Yes.
He's gone and seen Stan Lee a few times before.
That is a very, very good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So, Comic Books 22, he mentioned that, because I responded with, you've seen Stan Lee before. Like, you can go to his Instagram and see that he gets a ton of stuff signed and graded, and he's had experiences getting things signed by Stan Lee in the past. And he mentioned that this was a new team. Okay, these are all new people. This is not his normal entourage that Stan Lee has. Things have changed. Things have changed drastically since his wife, Joan, passed away in July of 2017. Yeah. But we saw the team changing really as of the start of the year. And this is a couple months old. That's why we're talking about this right now. Comic Books 22, he mentioned that Kia Morgan, and I'm going to try to remember to call him Morgan for now on, because that's how he's referenced in all these articles, is Morgan.
It's just easier.
Everyone has like 4 or 5 names. Mm-hmm. It gets so confusing. But Morgan, he said that Morgan, manhandled this comic book, clearly didn't know what he was doing, and that for as much as he disliked Max Anderson, remember that name? Mm. Max Anderson is Stan Lee's old partner that would go to conventions and be the person, his right-hand man, did it for like a decade, or if not longer.
Like 15 years, I think.
15 years. Said, since 2002, and did upwards of 15+ conventions a year with Stan Lee. Okay, that's a lot. This is a good friend of Stan, at least was a good friend. Max Anderson. Comic Books 22 said, although I dislike, I think he may have even said hated, but I'm gonna make sure that his message is up there, because I don't want to misquote here. Exactly. But he said he disliked Max Anderson.
I remember that.
He greatly disliked Max Anderson, called him a criminal, which got me, but perked my ears. I'm like, oh, there's more to this story. I got to find out. Yep. And said, but regardless of how bad of a person Max Anderson is, he would have never touched my comic book like that. Mm-mm. Which is, that's something to be said, because there's a lot to be said about Max Anderson.
Unfortunately. Doesn't seem like anybody's entirely innocent in this whole saga.
Guys, it gets weird. This whole thing is so strange.
Still haven't even really gotten into
Guys,
any of
there's
it.
so much. There's so much, and I don't even know how much I want to get into. So please, I guess the first thing we're gonna say is mention in the comments if you have any questions, or if you want us to elaborate on anything, because we don't want to dive too deep into something that no one cares about. But we find it super interesting, not in the best way, but super interesting. Like the holes go so deep.
And we spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time in the past few hours trying to make sense of this ourselves, and also to make sure that what we go over in this video right now is not too overwhelming with all of the tiny little details that are in these articles.
It's well put.
Yeah.
And that we don't do it wrong. We don't want to say anything wrong.
Don't want to say anything wrong either.
Because there's lawyers involved with all of this. There is key individuals that have been part of Stanley's life for a long time, part of this. His daughter's part of this.
His daughter, yep.
So we've brought up two names here. We're going to talk about Morgan, his current partner.
Yep.
Okay, some people want to call him a caretaker. Specifically said, I'm not his caretaker, I'm his friend, I'm his partner. I've been working with him for a long time. That's what Morgan says. Then we have Max Anderson, who Max was the person in charge of a lot of the memorabilia at the shows for years, working for the Stanley, his company, POW. When you go to the shows and they have this huge booth, I mean, that was Max's job, running the booths and going to conventions with Stan. Comic Books 22 is saying that he met Max on multiple occasions, and he was like the liaison of taking the comic book from one person and putting it in front of Stan and saying, Stan, this is where you got to sign, because Stan hasn't been able to see for a long time.
Okay, so you don't just go hand your comic to Stan when you wait in line? You give it to his,
you
goons.
give him. Exactly.
Okay, and
you give him to someone else, and then they
put it in front of him.
Yeah, because he makes mistakes, and he's getting old.
Is that how it's done for normal, like anybody else, or is
Not
it just
at
for people of Stan's age?
No, this is exclusively for Stan, is what it seems like.
Okay.
For good reason too. I mean, there's been stories of mistakes done. He's made errors on comic books before. He's been doing this a long time. He signs a lot of books, and sometimes he makes a mistake. I mean, there's an Instagram video that I made talking about a Spider-Man comic that he accidentally signed over a Todd McFarlane signature.
Oh man.
Yeah, and ruined the comic. Well, it technically didn't ruin it. It gave it a really good story, but he made up for it by writing Excelsior on the cover, and
helps.
which is cool. But we're going to get back to Max Anderson, because his name's brought up in this, and we have some updates for today, and we are already, oh my gosh, we are pretty far in. Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to have to oh geez. Okay. So Max Anderson is a longtime friend of Stan Lee, and as of January 9th, we found out some news about Max Anderson.
Oh really?
Yes.
What news would that be?
There are claims as of January 9th that was released by the Daily
Mail.
By the Daily Mail, excuse me. I was blanking on that name, and I wanted to make sure I said that right. So there was an article released January 9th by the Daily Mail that said that they had spoken to individuals from the nursing home that Stanley had employed, that there may have been some sexual assault allegations, that he has declined and said that it's all made up, it's all a cash grab and everything. And that story is pretty much done. We haven't heard any updates since January. It seems like nothing's happened from it, and that it is false. Yeah. We have no reason to believe that this is true at this point. But in that same article, it was released that Max Anderson was convicted of a crime back in 2002.
That's what it was. Okay, that's where I got the 2002 from.
Yes, in 2002. So he wasn't working with Stan at that time.
After that.
Yeah, so he was working with Stan for at least a decade, but in 2002, that's when he was committed of a crime. What crime was he committed of? Well,
not a good one.
It wasn't a good one.
He was good crimes.
Yeah, no. I mean, he abused his wife and went to jail for a year for it, and they got 36 months probation for that. So it wasn't a good scene.
No.
And then but that's not all. In 2000
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, but wait, there's more. In 2010, there was another criminal case that was brought up where he was charged with putting his son in a chokehold and slamming him on the ground. So this guy, he's got some rough stuff in his past, okay? Now, the reason why we bring that up is because the timing that this happened. Because today, as of today, April 10th,
Yes.
we have the Hollywood Report,
Hollywood Reporter, the
the
magazine.
Hollywood Reporter magazine.
They put out a big article.
They put out a big article, and their article goes into a lot of things. So many things that we're not going to cover in this one conversation, but the article does cover specific stuff about Max Anderson and a couple other people. Now, Max Anderson claims that this sudden release of his criminal background was released by Morgan.
Stanley's current right-hand man.
Yes. He alleges that this is part of a smear campaign by Morgan. Morgan, again, is his current guy. This is interesting because there's another person involved, supposedly involved in a smear campaign, and his name goes by Jerry Alvarez. Jerry Alvarez. If you haven't been following some of the recent reports that have come out in this last few months, there was a TMZ report that broke back in January, early January 4th to be exact, where it was released that there was a $300,000 check that Stan Lee wrote out, made payable to a business that Stan Lee said wasn't me. It wasn't me. And then there was an $850,000 condo purchase in Stan Lee's name.
Also not him.
Also says it wasn't me. We didn't know who this was for a long time until today. And today it's released in this report that it was Jerry Alvarez who this money was supposedly given to, and that this condo that was being purchased was for him. And he claims that he has also been part of a smear campaign.
That he's being threatened.
Yes.
And he fears for his life. And that
which is why he needs a house. That's his reasoning. His reasoning of why he needed the money. Well, Stanley gave him the money.
That's, sure.
Okay, sure. Stanley gave you $300,000 and you're a really good friend of Stanley. $850,000 condo.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, he says in this article that apparently there were death threats. He was concerned for his life. Stanley said, "I want you to move closer to me." And
so I can keep you safe?
So he can, I guess so. So you can be close to me. I don't know. But here's $850,000 for a condo in my name. So it's weird stuff. But we're not diving too deep into this. This is just what was told today. Okay. Now, getting back to Max Anderson. Okay, this is important for today because he's saying that this smear campaign started back in January 9th when his criminal record was released, because this hadn't come up until then. All right, that's a really interesting point to this, is that all of a sudden this stuff's coming up. 2018. Okay, he's been working with Stan for about a decade at least. What did we find out today outside of both of these people saying that there is a smear campaign against them? Okay. And that they both are, there's some questionable activity as well that they've been in. There was a declaration that was released by the Hollywood Reporter. Sum it up, basically.
It's about an 8-page document that Stan Lee's lawyer had drafted, and Stan Lee read it, to the best of his abilities, because he's got an eye problem, as he pointed out today in one of his videos, that he doesn't read so well. He's apparently going blind, he says. And so his lawyer wrote this for him, read it to him, Stan Lee signed it, and it got notarized. It's basically this big document explaining how his daughter, JC, is what she goes by, how she is extremely financially irresponsible and completely, entirely dependent on Stan, and, Stan and his wife before she passed away, that their daughter was dependent on her parents entirely for survival, basically. She never was married. She's never held down a solid enough job to support herself. So she got used to living beyond her means.
Mm-hmm. She's 67.
Mm-hmm.
Never married.
No.
Never had a job.
Seems a little odd, but I guess,
Yeah. this declaration also goes on to say that there are bad actors in her life.
Bad actors with bad intentions.
And some of those names are as followed. Jerry Alvarez.
I remember that name. That's weird.
Oh, we just talked about him. Yeah. Oh, and
who?
Kia Morgan.
That's weird.
Whoa, another bad actor. And then there's a third, which we're not going to get into, but it's her lawyer.
Yeah.
It's her lawyer, which makes sense, like why that name would be thrown in there as well, as someone influencing her to possibly.
They're both working through their lawyers. It makes sense.
Exactly. And at the end of this declaration, it says that the power of attorney is to be remain between two people, JC, Stanley's daughter.
Correct.
And none other than Max Anderson,
who we just talked about before.
So, so this came out today.
Yeah.
And immediately, because this is something that obviously Stan knew that was coming out, because this article was released with video footage from Stan Lee's rebuttal.
Yeah, today, right? Those little videos.
This all happened in the same day. If anything, they probably reached out to him and said, hey, we're going to release this. Do you have a comment? So Stan's like, I need to go on the mic.
Yep.
So you can go to first off, everything we're talking about, links are in the description, okay?
Yes, very important.
Because there's only 4 different articles we're talking about, because those are the ones that everything's been formed on. It's Daily Mail and The Hollywood Reporter, and then a little TMZ sprinkled in there, but that's more breaking news. You actually get the actual, the facts and who said what in the other 2 sources that I just mentioned. But this declaration, indeed, I mean, you can see every page of it on this report.
Yep.
It has Stan Lee's signature at the bottom, okay? It's clearly Stan Lee's signature, and this was done by the lawyer, Tom
Lawless.
Tom Lawless. Remember that name too, because he's going to come back into this story in a second. Because, let's go over the videos. We're going to go over the videos, and then we're going to talk about Tom Lawless, and we're going to round this out with Todd McFarlane, because there's just so much to talk about.
People keep popping up all over this damn story.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Yep. And I hope you guys can follow. We're trying to keep this as clear-cut as possible. So this declaration, Stan Lee went on the mic, rather on video.
Yes.
And what did he say, Ryan?
He basically said that this declaration that I wrote like less than 2 months ago is entirely false. He doesn't know why Lawless, his lawyer, would write these lies. That's how he phrases it. Mm-hmm. He says anybody who says this stuff or believes this stuff is telling lies. They've got ulterior motives, and they're not to be trusted.
Yeah, he says that my daughter and I have had the best relationship
that
ever.
we've ever had. Yeah, exactly.
And my buddy Morgan, we have a great relationship too.
He's actually helping me film this right now,
yeah,
he says.
Yeah, and that's another thing. It's kind of weird, but this video that Stan records, it's literally, you hear Morgan say, all right, action.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Go ahead, Stan. Go start it up. I'm recording you.
Yep.
So Morgan, the guy that he's on the mic to talk about how he's a great guy and they're good friends, he's the one who's he's
in that document.
Capturing the content here. He's filming Stan. And then at the end of the video, he says, oh, Stan, don't forget to talk about your disability.
Yeah, we should have wrote down the exact term for it.
Yeah.
It's a doctor word.
It's a doctor word, and you know what? It's okay. It's something to do with his eyesight.
Degenerative eyesight.
Yeah, degenerative something. So he reminds him at the end of it, and Stan goes, oh, to hell with that.
Yeah,
so he says something like that.
And then the video cuts out.
And then there's a second video, because apparently it had to be filmed.
It had to be discussed.
He had to be discussed. So there's a second video. In the second video, what does he say?
That's when he says, oh, I'm losing my eyesight. I'm not able to see things as well as before.
That's why Morgan has to read my emails. That's why Morgan reads my emails and has for a while. I thank him for doing it, kind of thing. And then there's this thing with the lawyer that I thought was kind of strange in the video.
Yeah, that's... in this first part of the video, he specifically mentions Mr. Lawless, my lawyer. It's a strange name for a lawyer to have. He mentions him by name, and then later on in that second video, he says, my lawyer, who I only had for a few days, whose name I don't even remember, which...
He just said his name.
He just said his name.
Yeah, that was so strange.
That's a red flag.
Stan seems totally aware Okay, he actually seems rather sharp in this video.
Alert and coherent.
It's like 3 minutes straight, and he's delivering information. He's like, "This is what's on my mind." He didn't look like he was second guessing anything. He didn't look like he was being coerced in any way. But Morgan was filming him. Yeah. Morgan reminded him of some things that he needed to talk about. So there is some obvious coaching that's happening there. And then at the end of it, Stan says, like in the beginning of the first video, Stan mentions the lawyer's name. He says Tom Lawless. I don't know why he's writing up this crazy shit. Yep. He doesn't say shit, but he's like, I don't know why he's... Yeah, he should have said that. I don't know why... He basically did. He's like, I don't know why he's trying to write all this stuff. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Yeah. And then the second video, he goes, oh, yeah, well, Tom... Well, what's it? Whatever his name. I don't even remember. Like, he acts like he doesn't remember his name.
I don't remember his name. I only had him for a few days as my lawyer.
Okay, so, and that's what he says, a few days. He had Tom Lawless for his lawyer for a few days. Now, he's old, okay? We know. He could be, but that's a pretty big mistake because I happen to know for sure that he did not have his lawyer, Tom Lawless, for only a few days because... Interesting. Because as of February 28th, that's when we saw the second breaking news happen, okay? That's when the Daily Report reported that there was a scuffle happening at Stanley's house. Police were involved. What happened exactly? We don't want to dive into it too deep, but essentially what happened is, and this is all in our sources, you can see them below, Morgan, the current right-hand man to Stanley, filming the video, okay? This is the same guy we're talking about. Morgan called the police because he felt that JC, Stanley's daughter, and Mr. Max Anderson, the current manager at that time, were in a scuffle, that they were in an argument that was getting loud, and they were concerned for safety. So the police arrive, and the result of that is this headline. I'm just going to read it here. This is the headline. I'm not like I'm reading it straight from Daily Mail, Daily Mail, yep, that's it. Stanley fires manager and his nurse who gave him... I guess I'm gonna have to say it. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it. Okay, exclusive. Stanley fires manager and his nurse who gave him naked showers over plot to estrange him from his daughter and sole heir as cops probe missing millions and he battles pneumonia.
It's kind of a gossipy title. It's a gossipy newspaper, if that's the right phrase.
It kind of is. But they're the ones who are breaking the story, and to be fair, all of those things are covered in this story.
They do go into all of that.
They go into all of it, and I think the thing that we need to the main thing that we're discussing is the people involved within his inner circle. I don't want to dive into the sexual allegations. We can spend a whole podcast talking about that because that goes further back with a lot of different stuff.
That's a lot more work.
It's a lot more work, and it's not something I feel like discussing on the mic. But what is important is that as of the 28th, that is when Tom Lawless was fired.
Yep.
Okay, at least that's what the article says, is that aside from Stanley firing his manager, Max Anderson, he fires the nurse, and Tom Lawless is now gone. He's fired now. That's as of the 28th.
They cleaned house on that day, though. They got rid of like the gardener and the housekeeper and like the accountant.
They did. Oh yeah, new accountant. Guess who? And guess the new accountant.
I remember that.
And the new accountant, guess who's he's friends with?
I thought he was related. They had the same last name.
Yeah, they're
related to Tobey Maguire. That's what the article said.
Oh, he's related to Tobey Maguire?
Got some kind of relation to Tobey Maguire. Oh, same last name, cousin or something like that. We gotta.
Yeah, they actually said they did say Tobey Maguire, but these friends of Morgan's.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's another friend of Morgan's.
So he's pushing out the old people, bringing in people he's friends with.
Allegedly.
Let me clarify.
Old people. But this is the part that I want to shed light on, is that Stanley said that this guy was only his attorney for a couple days. All right. As of the 28th, we know that Tom Lawless was let go. Okay, he was fired or whatever. They got a new lawyer.
Yep.
The sexual assault allegation that broke news January 9th, we're talking over a month. We're pushing almost 2 months, okay? Guess who was his lawyer at that time representing him?
Probably a different guy.
Right? Because he just got Tom Lawless for a couple days, right? Yeah. No, it was Tom Lawless.
That's weird.
Isn't that weird? That's a pretty big slip up because it doesn't sound like he was only his lawyer representing Lee for a couple days.
If it's me, a couple days is like a week max.
2 weeks.
Yeah, give him credit. Yeah, 2 weeks.
This is a month and a half, and that's assuming that January 9th is his start day, the day of the scandal. No.
He hires him on the day the scandal breaks.
The scandal broke on the 9th. He was handling this scandal at least at the end of December when they filed the cease and desist to the nursing home that they were worried was defaming Stan Lee. Rather alleging to have been defaming Stan Lee by creating these allegations or suggesting that the allegations were true, which, by the way, there's been no case drawn from this. There's been no allegations. No one stepped up. There is no information as of today, any progress from that case or alleged activities. So it's strange. It's strange. But now we come up to today, okay? And that's what I want to chat about today, because it's easy to look at this from afar, because what's like the obvious thing? Like typically, what's most likely going on is what's going on. Well, but what comes to mind when you see something like this, Ryan?
It just looks shady. It looks like there are a handful of people in his inner circle who are circling,
possibly taking advantage,
who are jockeying for power in a very Game of Thrones type way. Each one of them competing to get close to the king.
Ooh, it's a good reference, and it's very, very well fitting. That is ultimately the first thing people think of. You go through the comments, you look at Instagram, you look at what people are saying about this most recent convention experience, and they're saying like, oh, what's going on with the people he's working with? What's going on with the convention hall? Like, what are they doing? How did they let so many people there like take up his time? He's an old man. Like, there's all these questions that start to come up. And I guess this is a good way to kind of round this very lengthy podcast out, is to discuss kind of our thoughts on
how does Todd McFarlane fit into this.
That's a conclusion. That's where I kind of brought my opinion into this. So after this convention took place, Todd McFarlane went to visit Stan Lee, and we'll make sure that source is in the description as well. Excuse me. And yeah, Todd goes to visit Stan Lee. There's a little article written about it, and you know what Todd doesn't say? He doesn't say that Stan looks like he's under duress. He doesn't say that Stan Lee looks like he's losing his mind.
Nope.
He doesn't say that, hey, I think we need to get some doctors in here. Stanley's kind of saying some funny stuff. No, he says that like him and Stan Lee talked about the good times. Stan joked about being old and how it sucks, but what you gonna do about it. Talked about missing Joan, his wife, how about feeding the animals outside. Comic book industry, Todd rounds out the conversation saying, you want to know what I experienced when I visited Stan? I just visited an old man. He's got stories. I chatted with him. That was it. I'm sorry. I think that if the Todd father doesn't have any red flags, like if he doesn't see any red flags coming up.
And they've got a history, right? They know each other.
Oh yeah.
Well.
Oh, they know each other quite well.
Okay.
Quite well. And it'd be hard to say. Like, that Todd McFarlane, regardless of how close he is to Stan, that Todd McFarlane looks up to Stan Lee. Like, really looks up to Stan Lee.
Anybody in the industry does.
But especially Todd.
Yeah.
Like, especially Todd McFarlane. And Todd McFarlane, he's an elite like Stan. Like,
entrepreneur.
He's another big entrepreneur. Yeah. He is somebody who would be able to spot something wrong from a mile away. Okay? And the fact that he didn't say anything negative, that's something we have to consider. So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing is that Stan Lee is an entrepreneur. And there's people who have said, like, what's he doing at conventions? What are the convention halls doing? What are the business, the people that he's with, the employees? Like, they're treating him like crap. What's going on? What's going on? He pays these people to be there.
Yep.
Okay, this is his business. This is his legacy. This is everything to him. You're not 95 taking pictures at a convention hall where 9 times out of 10 it smells like BO. Okay? Like, and standing there all day or sitting down with a little parka on all day. Mm-hmm. You don't do that unless you want to do that.
Yeah, he doesn't have to. He definitely doesn't have to. He's got enough money.
He could have stopped doing that a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? I don't know if you guys... Okay, so like I may be diving a little bit deep into more of the entrepreneur stuff, but I think of Gary Vaynerchuk. Do you know who Gary Vaynerchuk is?
Not at all. Never heard of him.
Gary Vaynerchuk. I really like this guy. Gary Vaynerchuk, he's a hustler. Big in the wine industry, big into social media, and big into social media marketing. And he's somebody who films his entire life basically on camera, and basically to show one thing, that if you want to like make it really, really big, like if you really want to to create a legacy that's memorable, you got to put the work in, and you can't stop.
Yeah.
I look at Stan Lee and think that's Stan Lee. Stan Lee's never stopped working. He's always been Stan Lee. He's always been this hustling mogul. You know, he's an elite comic book personality, a legend. And I think of someone like Gary Vaynerchuk when he's 95. And you know what? Maybe a better comparison is Todd McFarlane, because we've already talked about him. I see Todd McFarlane drawing until he can't draw anymore. I see Gary Vaynerchuk working until he can't work anymore. Probably past a point where people in his life are going, you should probably stop.
Yeah,
You should probably stop. Slow down, man. Like, you're going to probably rush the time you have left if you don't stop. And you know what? They're going to keep going because it's in their blood.
Yep.
It's all they think about.
We didn't even talk about Stan Lee's blood either.
We didn't even talk about Stan Lee's blood.
That's a whole nother topic.
It's a whole nother topic. That was something that the IG Comic Fan wanted me to touch on, the whole blood thing.
Yep.
Well, part of the we can at least mention here, because we mentioned Jerry Alvarez. Part of the smear campaign, he alleges, is that whole thing with the blood.
Yeah.
They're saying that was all part of the smear campaign, that they pinned it all on him.
That it was some kind of weird, creepy, fraudulent way that they got the blood, and they drew Stan Lee's blood and didn't tell him what it was going to actually be used for. And
if you don't know what happened, TMZ broke a story earlier this month, actually, saying that someone close to Stan Lee is trying to steal blood or something. And ultimately what happened, Alvarez says, no, we all knew about it, Stan Lee and his doctor included, and everybody's making this out to be like I'm this bad person, when in reality it wasn't. But we don't know. This is all speculation. This is all hearsay. Everybody in this story has something else to say, including Stan Lee.
That's why it's such a frustrating, complicated story.
It's
Every
so
single
confusing.
person contradicts themselves at some point or another.
They do. They really do. So I guess my point isn't that, do I think, like, okay, obviously, you look at those pictures,
Yeah.
Stan Lee, stay home.
That's my advice.
That's my advice to Stan.
You did it.
You've done your
legacy
signatures,
is set.
man.
You're good.
You're set. Your
Stand.
legacy is there. You have the seal of approval, Excelsior, whatever you want to say, man. You're good to go. But that's our opinion, you know?
Yeah.
And who are we to say someone who is able and willing to do the work that we look at as going, oh my gosh, like what's happening? Who are we to say like, no, we can't let him do that.
Exactly.
This guy's worth 50 mil or more. He travels around with an entourage of like 5 to 6 plus security guards. You think he doesn't have doctors hanging around?
Yeah.
You know, his whole life is taken care of, at least from what we can see, from the evidence that we have. All these articles say 50 mil is that like nice number they can all agree on. Some of them say up to 75 mil.
He should have a lot more, in my opinion. but
Probably
he's
should.
doing all those cameos for free.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But my point is that in this moment, he could be getting taken advantage of. That's very clear. Obviously, there's a lot more to be said about this, but he could be being taken advantage of. We don't know. But also what could be very true is that he's allowing himself, in a way, to be taken advantage of. That he's maybe okay with his daughter possibly taking advantage of him, if she is indeed doing that. Because that's a lot of these articles are making it sound like there's 4 people in his life that aren't good, and his daughter is included in that, and she's the sole heir to his fortune, and she's never worked a day in her life, and
The articles say it, and he said it himself in that
apparently
February.
supposedly said it himself. Maybe apparently he's signing stuff without knowing it, but
It's a complicated,
it's a
confusing
complicated
mess of a story.
It is a mess. He could be getting taken advantage of very well. He may also just have a really bad relationship with his daughter. He may not care anymore. He may just want to be doing what makes him happy, which is seeing fans, being Stan Lee. He told McFarlane he misses his wife. Told him it sucks getting old.
Yeah,
He seems okay.
Yeah.
I really hope he's okay.
That goes without saying. Yes, sir. I hope he is okay as well. The man has earned... If it was me, I would certainly not be sitting at any convention.
Oh, hell no.
No. 75 tops, I'd be at home chilling with all this beer, watching Marvel movies and not doing anything.
It's
pretty much what I do anyway.
It's an entrepreneur thing, man. It's like there's people who it makes them sick to not go after something, to go after their goals. He's just a great example of someone who is still going after their goal. It's legacy, man. It's like, I bet that he's not going to stop. I bet he's not going to stop until he absolutely has to.
I agree. Although
I don't know if I agree with that decision. I don't know if it's a smart decision. It may be costing him years off his health or off his life. Who knows?
I'm not sure what else he hopes to achieve. I mean, I don't think he's going to create another superhero that eclipses Spider-Man or the Avengers or
Or
Thor.
if he even wants to.
Yeah, like he's done what he's going to do.
Why sit for hours in a convention hall? I don't know. But, that's not for us to decide. That's for Stan Lee to
That's
decide.
up to him, man. If he wants to, let him do it.
And as long as he is of sound mind.
And it seems like he is.
And it seems like he is.
Regardless of who's around him and who's pushing him potentially one way or the other, he seems to at the very least, have control over his mental faculties, which is what Todd McFarlane said too.
Yes. Then who are we to say anything otherwise? If anything, it's on us for going to see him.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And allowing it to happen. And to being part of it. And by the way, we've also mentioned, like, at the convention, people are upset about the convention hall. The convention hall had nothing to do with this. Stan Lee's business are the ones who set up the signature signing. Okay, so Stan Lee is the one who allowed all these people to be there to do the signings. Now, okay, whether it was directly him or those involved in in his circle that orchestrated this whole thing, because I doubt that he's really part of the inner workings of this. He's probably just told, "Hey, sit there. Here's your
going to a
here's your
con
silver.
today, Stan.
Yeah, we're going to a con, whatever." But it has to do with the business. Yeah, it doesn't have to do with the convention hall. It doesn't have to do with the. I mean, honestly, a lot of the employees that were there to help. They're there to help. You have to look at the business of Stan Lee. If you're upset about the time that you're waiting to get things signed for, or if you feel like it's unethical in any way, there's a reason why they're there.
Yeah.
Stan's paying them. They're on payroll. Don't forget that.
Yeah,
he's making money. He's making a lot of money. He's 95. He's not gonna be able to spend it all, but he's making a lot of money. So
the daughter might be able to spend it all.
His daughter, apparently. I mean, this article. Okay, so the declaration that Stan Lee says is false. I mean, you read it; it doesn't seem false. I'll just be straight. That article sounds like a man who's writing about his daughter and how freaking disappointed he is in her. That's what this. I encourage everyone to read this thing because it's quite sad. But in that article, it alleges that Stan Lee's daughter is spending between $20,000 and $40,000 a month on credit.
Yep.
It's all credit cards. And that she can't hold a job. And it's sad. It's really sad. But we also know that he wasn't around very much when she was younger. And we know that she has never been married or held a job. And she's been booted from restaurants and businesses. And there's all these bad things. There's a lot to be said about it. This man's lived. It's a complicated. It's unfortunate that things are getting so complicated towards the end of such a long and energetic and impactful life and legacy that Stan Lee's created for us. Right, at least co-created for us. I'm going to make sure to say that. Yeah. Oh, I got to get my zinger in there.
Sorry, Steve.
Any last words, Ryan, before we wrap this up? It doesn't feel good.
No.
It doesn't feel good. We can talk more. Guys, there's more to this. There's
so
a lot more to this. And I've been convinced by every person I shared information with, including Ryan and others. Don't talk about these things. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Just focus on the top layer. And the top layer is so deep.
There's so much here.
There's so much in just the top layer. So if you're interested in us like diving deeper into this, let us know in the comments. We'll do it.
I also strongly recommend reading these articles that we're going to put in there. Yeah, there's way more information than you'll see what we meant when it's like, we spent hours trying to figure out what to say, what not to say, how to say it, what to leave out. There's a lot. There's a lot there.
A heck of a lot.
Yeah.
But we do appreciate you for joining us today.
Thanks.
It's awesome. Well, your camera's got to say
I'll
thanks
say it
over
here,
there.
too. Yeah, thanks.
Say it, that's the thing.
You guys count, too. That camera counts. That camera.
Well, see, we do these live. So if
cameras
you want to
everywhere,
follow us on
man.
Instagram, where you can watch us record this live and
On
make
that
all these
camera.
mistakes, we have a camera over there. You can follow us at ComicTom101. You can find Ryan on Instagram as well.
At Sir Sargeant is me.
Ooh. And, you know, I am Comic Tom. I do appreciate your time today.
You are Comic Tom.
And this is Ryan.
And this is Ryan.
And he appreciates you too.
I do.
You know, really, we just hope that, if anything, if you can do one thing for us today, April 10th, when this was recorded,
That is today.
it's to geek responsibly.
Please geek responsibly.
Enough said. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to see more comic book content like this, hit the subscribe button. And if you need comic books, well, you can go to geekstreet101.com and sign up for my mystery mail call. It's a subscription service. I send you comic books monthly. It's dope.